Good morning. Welcome to the CUNY Queens Sustainability Consortium Community Roundtable. My name is Tari Hum, and I chair the Urban Studies Department at Queens College. The CUNY Queens Sustainability Consortium is made up of an interdisciplinary faculty group of social scientists, and lawyers from the 5 CUNY campuses in Queens: CUNY Law School, LaGuardia Community College, Queens College, Queensborough Community College, and York College. Even though we are gathering in this virtual space today, we acknowledge that CUNY Queens campuses rest on the unceded ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples, including the Canarsie, Matinacock, Lenape, and Rockaway peoples. We acknowledge that academic institutions were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land CUNY Queens institutions are located. This acknowledgement of the Canarsie, Matinacock, Lenape, and Rockaway peoples, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations, demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. A year ago, we received a small CUNY interdisciplinary climate crisis research grant to form a CUNY Queens Sustainability Consortium to build on and expand our capacity for borough-wide research and coordination on community-engaged planning, policy, and interventions that address the climate crisis and contribute to solutions and strategies for resiliency, equity, and a just transition. This community roundtable is one of 2 convenings, and my colleague, CUNY Law Professor Andrea McArdle, will speak at the end of the day about our plan for a second roundtable next month. For today, we are excited to learn from Queens community and environmental justice leaders who will be presenting their work on 3 panels: a 10:30 a.m. panel on New York City planning, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, and environmental justice, a 1 p.m. panel on coastal resilience, green infrastructure, and community voices, and a 2:40 panel on public health and quality of life for all in Queens. At 12:10, we're honored New York City Council member Costa Constantinides, and chair of the Environmental Protection Committee, will give a keynote address. In addition to presenting their work, we asked our community leaders and presenters to share any past experiences or collaborations with CUNY and to discuss ways that CUNY and the consortium in particular can support and advance community-led and engaged environmental and climate justice research, policy, and practices. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, distinguished Professor George Hendry, of Queens College's School of Earth and Environmental Sciences, to introduce University Executive Director of Sustainability and Energy Conservation, Tria Case, and then Queens College's, CUNY Associate Vice Chancellor, Tamara Schneider, for their welcome remarks. Thank you, George.
Sure, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to speak at this workshop. We worked pretty hard, mostly due to Tari's really good organization skill, bringing us all together. Thanks a lot, Tari. I'm really pleased to introduce and have the opportunity to introduce Tria Case, who's the University Director of Sustainable and Energy Conservation. She leads the New York City Solar Partnership and the Smart DG Hub for the City University of New York. Ms. Case received her undergraduate degree from Union College and earned the JD degree from Brooklyn Law School. Prior to joining CUNY in 2006, Ms. Case served as the Director of Office and Environmental Business Services for Empire State Development, and that supports policies and programs across New York State that assisted local government and industry in meeting New York State's environmental regulations. The initial stages for her work at CUNY, Ms. Case coordinated the development of individual sustainability plans and a task force for each CUNY campus to support implementation of these plans. As a sustainability director, Ms. Case coordinates and provides resources to CUNY's 25 institutions of higher education in order to help meet the goal of reducing CUNY's energy consumption as our effort to help fight climate change through sustainable CUNY Conserves program, a program that she helped to build. Ms. Case also secures and manages millions of dollars in funding for operations and maintenance for projects including the revolving fund, the Sustainable Investment Fund, and that supports energy saving projects on CUNY campuses, of which our own campus has been a beneficiary. Since 2006, Ms. Case has led the development and implementation of multiple federal, state, and city-funded solar and energy storage programs on behalf of New York City and New York State, working with large stakeholder groups. And this has led to a significant growth in solar capacity, a very good thing for New York State, particularly in light of the sorts of blackouts and emergencies that we know can happen. And that provides energy storage, which is expected to follow the same trajectory. Ms. Case formed the New York City Solar Partnership in 2006, working collaboratively with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and the New York City Economic Development Corporation to develop and implement comprehensive plans for large-scale solar integration and associated economic development in New York City. One of the current focuses of her work is to identify and address soft or balance of system costs for implementation and adaptation of solar in New York, and that's conducted through the New York Solar Smart program, which she developed. In the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, which we all remember so fondly, in 2012, Ms. Case formed the Smart Distributed Generation Hub, or the DG Hub, to develop a strategic pathway for more resilient distributed energy systems that is also supported by both federal and state initiatives. With city, state, and federal participation, DG Hub aims to integrate energy storage and distributed generation into emergency power and resiliency deployment. So I'm pleased to introduce Tria and hope to hear about CUNY's programs in these areas. Tria?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, George. Appreciate it. And I'm very, very happy to be here and join this conversation. You know, in just a few minutes, I thought I would just give you an overview of some of the things that Sustainable CUNY has been working on, and do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the work that is accessible to anybody in the community that is interested in understanding things like solar potential or battery storage, and also just to give you a sense of what we're achieving on our campuses, since we ourselves are 30 million square feet here in the city. Sustainable CUNY, really what we work to do is to integrate sustainability into both the university and New York City. And so our work has really been focused in these two areas, both on campus work, both generally around sustainability, everything from composting to plastics reduction to reducing our energy use. And then also within our communities, recognizing that that's part of our responsibility across the city to find ways that we can support distributed generation. And as George said, one of the things that we realized as we started to look across the city, in particular, when we looked at things like solar and battery storage, understanding how to get through the process of things like permitting or financing are incredibly important in terms of making it easier to adopt these technologies. And so our team has been spending a lot of time with policymakers and decision makers, trying to help bring forward the tools and the understanding needed in order to streamline those processes. And CUNY really sits as the trusted third party, if you will, in the process, because we're a public institution, because we're an educational institution. We can really bring forward the data and the information that's necessary to help decision makers understand what the reality is if we're trying to meet targets and mandates. On campuses, what we've tried to do is separate our activities into, we think of as sort of the 7 pillars of sustainability. And that ranges from, energy and carbon to water to recycling, all the research and education activities, you'll hear a little bit about in a moment. Procurement, right? Can we buy recycled paper? Are there ways that we can think about how, when we procure, we can do it in a way that takes into consideration the impact of that procurement? Transportation, can we move ourselves to things like electric vehicles? And then at the end, also, sustainable nutrition. What are the decisions we're making regarding what we eat? And happy to also report that a few of our campuses have actually been able to create campus gardens, including Queens College. And able to use some of the compost materials in that garden. So every single one of our campuses has a sustainability council. And each one has created 10-year plans to help move towards the actions it will take to become more sustainable. And each campus has had, different, if you will, flavors of how to become more sustainable. But across all of our campuses, over 800 actions have been put forward and taken on. And when we look at that, we can see some of the progressions that have taken place on our campuses. And I'm going to give you a quick deep dive into what is happening on a day-to-day basis from a facilities perspective. Again, 300 buildings across CUNY, 30 million square feet. So we're about 1% of the city's electrical load ourselves. So really important that we take a look at our own buildings and that we can help to set the standards or the frameworks that others can follow. So the way that really starts is via energy data. And George, your classes have made use of that energy data
Thank you very
over
much.
the years. And actually, I think one of your students, went through that process and ended up becoming a Con Ed scholar for us, and is now one of our energy analysts and is helping to create some of the reports I'm going to show you. So energy data, I guess what gets measured gets done, right? So that's the key component of where we started. But at the end of the day, we also have things that are helping us to automate what happens in our buildings. Our buildings have building automation systems. Many buildings across the city have that. So when we have that data, when we can see what's happening real time, we can also program our building automation systems so they can help us become more optimized as we're using those buildings. And then we can also help them create standard operating procedures so that when folks enter a building, we don't turn everything on at once and create new peaks in our city. We can only produce so much energy. So if we can think about how we utilize equipment in our buildings and we create some standard operating procedures to make that happen, we're able to then try to create lower peaks and not quite and not demand as much from the grid, and maybe even allow ourselves to make better use of things like renewable energy. And when we can see what's happening, we can also manage those loads, and we can participate in programs like demand response. Remember those sort of those really hot days in July when we were having a hard time and the grid was starting to see some constraint. Con Ed comes to us and says, hey, can you maybe shut some things off so that we don't see peaks that are going to cause blackouts and brownouts in our communities? And Queens College and every other college across the university participates in these demand response programs and helps to make sure that we don't see blackouts and brownouts in our communities. And we've also set asset inventories across our community, across our campuses, so we can see what we have in terms of our equipment that's using energy, and we can make sure that we're doing the work necessary to optimize that equipment so that it's always in its best, in its it's always being maintained so that it's always optimized. And that comes from doing preventative maintenance. That's all the work that you have to do to make sure that you're changing your filters, that you're making sure that you've cleaned those filters or you've changed those filters so that air is moving the way it should, for example, and you're therefore optimized in terms of energy use. So all of this work is something that has to happen on a day-to-day basis. And I point that out because sustainability is really something that has to happen every single day. It's all the choices we make. It's all the actions we take. And that happens from every aspect of our lives. And in this case, all of our facilities folks on our campuses and all the people that are in all of our buildings across the city, they are so important in terms of making sure that we're operating as optimally as we can and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So at Queens College, one of our leading institutions in terms of really making sure that we have a robust operations and maintenance program and are thinking about this every day, we've been able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 22% since 2006. Across the university, we're at about 15%. At LaGuardia Community College, 52% since 2006. So each one of our campuses is really setting out to make sure that we're putting in place the programs necessary to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And like I said, that's something that's a day-to-day activity that we all have to take from, when you're the last one in the classroom, making sure that the lights are out, to making sure that what's behind the walls is being optimized as best we can. It's the things we don't see as well. I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about sort of the other piece of the work that we do, which is really what we call the distributed generation hub. As George said, particularly after Hurricane Sandy, we saw that we'd been working for some time, and I'll show you a little chart in a moment, to deploy solar across the city. And we've been seeing incredible success in the deployment of solar. But when Hurricane Sandy hit and the grid went down, our solar has to shut down at that point as well, so that it's not sending power back onto the grid when our line workers are out there trying to fix something. So we realized at that point that we needed to find ways to also deploy battery storage. So the distributed generation hub has really been focused on both storage and solar. And the idea is really that, again, CUNY, as that trusted third party, is able to bring together all of the stakeholders from all of the AHJs, whether that's the Department of Buildings or the fire department, industry, Con Edison, the New York Power Authority, and all the experts, and try to understand what are the barriers to deployment, what are the things that all the stakeholders need, and bring those to the table so that our policymakers, and all the folks that are doing the research can try to answer those questions, can try to solve those problems. And also our ombudsmen, who are part of our team and supported by the City of New York, are able to then provide technical assistance out to the community in order to be able to create that pathway to progress or forward. So looking at solar as a perfect example. So, when we started in around 2006, we couldn't find the solar across the city. We had to sort of go out there and locate those solar panels and figure out, what made somebody put solar on their rooftop. And over time, we were able to create the roadmap for New York City realizing its, solar potential, and to chart the pathway for policies and data that was needed in order to help realize our solar potential. And the work we did ranged from having ombudsmen, just being able to answer questions, to creating zones across the city that we could say, well, these are strategic because there are peaks during the day when solar would be producing at its best, to creating this partnership that George talked about with the city, the mayor's office of sustainability, and New York City Economic Development Corporation, so that we could all come together and make sure that the policies and incentives that needed to be put in place would be put in place. And the property tax abatement is a great example of that, where at the time, Long Island and Westchester were seeing growth, but New York City was not. And we needed to find some ways of balancing out the incentives in New York City with what was happening around us. And a property tax abatement was one way of doing that. And creating the roadmaps and making sure that we understood where the grid was ready. And I'm going to show you the solar map in a second, where we could see, well, where are the places in the city that the grid can host more solar, and where is the actual solar potential in the city, by creating a 3D map of the city that allowed us to see solar potential on every single building. And ultimately now we're well over 200 megawatts, on our way to 250. And we've got targets well above that. And we're really seeing, exponential growth. As we say, that hockey stick growth is happening. And now what we want to try to do is we want to try to see how we can help the battery storage marketplace sort of follow that, because like we said, solar is intermittent. And if the grid goes down, we want to be able to have battery storage along with that. So for those of you who haven't seen the NY Solar Map, nysolarmap.org or .com, you can plug in any address across the city, actually across the state. It will take you to that rooftop. It'll tell you what the solar potential of that, that roof is. That is taking into consideration shading. We have LiDAR data, which is a lasers shooting down onto the city, creating a 3D map of the city, so we can see what the solar potential is across every single rooftop. And that allows us to be able to, again, do all that sort of back-end data analysis. I'm going to call your attention right now to the Shared Solar Gateway, because I want to talk a little bit about that, because this is a community gathering. So many of us don't have control of our own rooftops. So we may have solar potential on the roof of the building we live in, but we don't control it. And so one of the policies that is really important to New York City and other urban areas is something called community shared solar, where you can have a host site that is a large rooftop or any space that can put a solar array on that roof. And a developer can come in, they can build that array, and customers across the city or across that zone can actually buy power from that remote solar installation. So now we can find locations across the city that might be able to host a large solar installation. That solar is going to put power back onto the grid. That solar is going to go out onto the grid, and a subscriber can buy that power, that solar power. They pay a subscription fee to the developer, and the developer in turn pays a lease payment to the host site. So in terms of being able to engage with our community, we can talk to host sites who have large rooftops. For them, it can be an opportunity to get a lease payment. And it's a way to support the local community, because now community members can be able to buy that solar off that rooftop. So community shared solar is one area that I think, we as, folks who want to support renewables in our communities now have a way of doing that, even if we don't have control of our own rooftop. One of the ways we've been working to support community shared solar has actually been a partnership with the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA. NYCHA made a commitment to 25 megawatts of solar across their portfolio, and we were able to use the back end of the New York City solar map to assess the solar potential of all of their rooftops. And they created a program that we're helping them to manage called Access Solar, where in fact now they've identified, we've identified all the sites, and the community can come together and put a solar installation up on that site. And again, the community is able to then purchase the power off of that site. So a wonderful way for NYCHA to be able to support the community around them and their community, and to utilize the rooftops in order to be able to support renewable energy. talking a little bit about storage. We've created a roadmap very similar to what we did for the solar community for battery storage. So now we can see what the permitting process is. Sometimes it may not be an easy process, but if we can see what it is, we can decide to take it on and do it. So working with FDNY and the Department of Buildings, we've now established a permitting process for battery storage in New York City. And we've been able to chart that. So if you jump on the NY solar map, you can see now this guide that can tell you how to permit a storage installation in the city. And we're seeing that hockey stick growth, and it goes up again this past year as well. So we're starting to see it happen. So if we can have the data, if we can chart the path, and we can work with the decision makers and get those incentives aligned, we can see that growth, which is what we're all after. So lots of information out there. One piece that I wanted to call your attention to before I close is the critical facility evaluator, which is again on the solar map. In every community, what we've been able to do is take a look at critical sites, fire stations, and any of the resiliency type cooling centers, things like that. We've charted them out. We've looked at the solar potential, and you can see where they are across the city and what the potential is. And that's another way now we could possibly use community shared solar and battery storage to help make those centers resilient. And one of the projects that we're going to be looking to stand up at Queens College soon is something called Vehicle to Grid, where we're going to have electric vehicles that will be two-way, so that we can use those vehicles to provide power back into the grid or into the campus when we need that power because of resiliency, because the grid may be down. So some really interesting stuff is now starting to happen as we look at creative ways to utilize battery storage, even utilizing electric vehicles. So with that, I'm gonna close, and I'm gonna wish you all a great conversation for the rest of the day today. There's a lot happening across the university. I think I only gave you a little snapshot there, but I encourage you to jump on the NY Solar Map and reach back to us if you have any questions or thoughts. And I thank Queens College for all of your leadership. You gave us a wonderful member of our team who has been incredible, and your leadership of your facilities folks as well. Has been an amazing resource for all of us across the university. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tria. I think that my experience with CUNY Central, see, I'm going to say in a little bit about how we feel a little bit disconnected, especially living over here in Queens, which is sort of a different country. But it's been really nice working with you and with people at Central who've helped us get this kind of information and develop programs within our college, and I think across all of CUNY. So thanks again, Tria. And I might say Tria has been very helpful to our students and welcomes them in. So for the rest of you CUNY people, if you're teaching something that relates to this topic, think about maybe incorporating something along these lines into your pedagogy. Now, with pleasure, I get to introduce CUNY's new Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, Dr. Tamara Schneider. She became CUNY's Associate Vice Chancellor and University Provost for Research in November of last year. Before that, she was Program Director for Social Psychology Program at NSF and was Professor of Psychology at Wright State University. Tamara received her BS and MA degrees in psychology from the Applied Behavioral Sciences program at Wright State University, then went on to SUNY Stony Brook, just a few miles out from us, for both her MA and PhD degrees in basic and applied social psychology, behavioral, and cognitive neurosciences with a minor in quantitative methods. Quantitative methods is probably absolutely central to much of the real research now going on in psychology, as indeed it is in all of the STEM fields. Since then, she's been a postdoctoral fellow at Yale and has had several other learning experiences, which included a fellowship with the NSF Advanced Training Institute, where she studied the use of immersive uh, virtual environmental technology as a methodological tool for social psychology. Now, I don't actually know what that is, but I'd like to learn about it. It sounds really interesting. She also had a fellowship in the Department of Psychology at the University of New South Wales, Australia. And she authored or co-authored 53 peer-reviewed journal publications with 10 papers currently under review or in preparation. She has 7 book chapters, 12 technical reports, and with all of that, she found time for 139 presentations at various meetings and other forums. Her primary research interests have been in stress resilience, psychology, emotional intelligence, and also in broadening the participation in the STEM field, where maybe she's well placed now within CUNY. On joining CUNY, our board of trustees noted that she's, and I'm going to quote, a leader and a researcher conducting valuable, forward-thinking work and is well positioned to support and sustain CUNY's research faculty and programs. As head of CUNY's Office of Research, she will be providing guidance for the research enterprise across all of CUNY, which produces more than 20,000 original peer-reviewed publications and more than $450 million in grants and contract awards annually. That's a lot of production. In her interview for the CUNY Faculty Senate, Dr. Schneider stated that from her time in Washington and as a researcher, she has noted that there's been an increase in funding for transdisciplinary scholarship in areas of societal importance. From my point of view, as a scientist working and teacher working with the general and very broad area of climate research and the connections with the biological world, I certainly appreciate the fact that these transdisciplinary studies are absolutely essential to how important societal problems are being addressed now. And I can state that this trend is particularly important in this climate-related research. Hence, our interdisciplinary climate research grant from CUNY that's funding this webinar. When asked what she hoped the faculty would ask of her as the university's research leader, she replied, and I'm going to quote again, "Faculty could ask me so many things. They could ask questions about funding resources for submitting more competitive proposals." Very good idea. And she said, "Please ask me questions. I'm here to serve faculty and all CUNY stakeholders." Well, Tamara, I don't know, maybe you'll need a guard at the door and sort of filter the rush. But I hope that CUNY faculty and others really take advantage of that. And I welcome the opportunity to speak with you myself about some of the things that are of broad interest to CUNY as well as to my college. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Schneider.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, George, for that. I'm so pleased to join you all this morning for such an auspicious event. I would like to thank Donna Chirico at York College for inviting me to join you all for the launch of this Queens Sustainability Consortium. And I congratulate all of you, the event organizers, for pulling together such an exceptional program. As you may well know, it'll be stated, and it has been, the consortium includes all 5 CUNY campuses in Queens County with the goal of understanding and addressing the many issues associated with climate change. By collaborating with community partners, it's necessary. It's not only laudable, but it is necessary. Climate change is an area where we must partner. This type of partnership is something that I have experience with. As a behavioral scientist in Ohio, I worked with the city of Dayton and Daytonians as we delved into important regional impacts of climate change, and we addressed climate mitigation and adaptation issues. and in my work at the National Science Foundation as a program director for social psychology and as the deputy director for the Division of Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences. It is so clear, it became so clear how important the partnership between academia, municipalities, and communities, the people in the communities, the different governance structures that may reside there, and absolutely with Native peoples who we need to attend much more to in this country. We must partner together. And CUNY is committed to the future of knowledge creation, of scientific and technological innovation, and training new scholars. And such a partnership can help all of those things. We draw on the talent of our many, many accomplished faculty, scientists, scholars. And as mentioned, the event today was supported by targeted seed funding from the Office of Research. Last year's focus was climate change. We also had seed funding this year for climate change, as well as COVID-19. These are important societal problems. They're vexing. We must come together across disciplines to address, understand these problems, come up with policies and ideas for how to deal with these things. By focusing on the cross-CUNY resources that come from my office, these seed funds can help to launch such initiatives, not sustain, but to launch such initiatives. And by doing so, we can really build on and highlight the strengths that CUNY has that are vital to New Yorkers and to the nation and the world. And so I thank you all for your work, for your collaboration on this critical issue of climate change. It affects every one of our lives in so many ways, and it's so important. And I congratulate you all on this event. And I know it's going to be a very inspiring and engaging day. So thank you all very much.